Hello and welcome to CCC TV with CCGs and RPGs are a way of life. I'm Card Counter Chris. Welcome to the video. As some of you all may know, I went to SCG Con Orlando over the weekend. I did make day 2 and then I kind of crashed and burned. With that said, still had a great time. I don't think the deck was bad. I think it was a decent metacall. But today I wanted to share with you the list that I played at SCG Con Orlando to day 2. I finished 147th, and I was the only person on Golgari Roots. With that out of the way, I don't believe that Roots is a great deck. I think Roots was a good meta choice. It goes about 50-50 with VV Cauldron. It goes really well against Dimir. It's also really good against aggro. All of that sounds great. Why not just have everyone playing Roots, right? Well, the downside is the bad matchups are pretty bad. It doesn't have much game against Kona. It's terrible versus control, and you have pretty much no answer to Temur Battlecry, which in a meta that I thought would be dominated by Cauldron, Dimir, and Mono Red, this is kind of where you wanted to be positioned. So let's take a look at the deck and see why it ticks. The key card of the deck is, of course, Insidious Roots. Tyvar did rotate, so we don't really have the combo elements to it, but it does allow us to make some mana. It makes plants. The plants grow bigger, and we build a wall against aggro decks and Cauldron, and just pretty much protecting our life totals until we could swing a lot of damage through. We do have main board Graveyard Hate in the form of Scavenging Ooze and Soul Cauldron. We have a lot of Artifact and Enchantment Hate. In the main deck alone, we have Insidious Fungus, which the ability works really good underneath of the Cauldron. We have 2 Scrap Shooters, which also have Reach, which we'll talk about that more in a minute. And we have Disruptive Stormbrood. To get the most value off of the Roots, we're running a big mill package of 4 Cash Grabs, 3 Dredger's Insights, and 4 Overlord of the Balmerks. We also get Surveil off Rubblebelt Mavericks. The thing that really kind of made the Cauldron matchup not great originally is they would fly over the top, whether that be through Quantum Riddler, whether that be through a dragon off Draconic Engineer, or just a really big Steam Core Scholar. So we ended up playing 4 Dragon Snipers, and then we had Carsey Revenant and Scrap Shooters to be able to shore up that part of the matchup. Esper Origins is just fine in a mill sort of style deck because you can just get the back end to get the value. And if it goes off, you get the 2/2 Trample, which is sometimes just enough to swing for lethal. Finally, rounding out this deck, we also wanted a couple pieces of removal. Bitter Triumph was really good for this. Because not only did it hit creatures at Planeswalkers at instant speed, but it would also let us discard cards, which we could then use to trigger our Roots activations and all of that. Going into the mana base, we did play the 4 Verges and the 4 Blooming Marshes because that's what we have access to with Black-Green. We were originally on 2 Underground Mortuaries because they do count for the Verges by being a swamp and a forest, but I trimmed it to 1 for a Restless Cottage to try to shore up a little bit on the control matchup. And then we're running a bunch of basics, and we only want the forests. That way we can use the Great Arishan City untapped. If you notice, we are running 3 starting towns, but we shaved the 4th to have less tapped mana, and they're just, in this deck, strictly worse than playing Blooming Marsh. Going into the sideboard, we had 3 Duresses for the control matchups. 2 Pick Your Poisons, which were very, very good this week. It is sorcery speed, but being able to have an opponent sacrifice an artifact or an enchantment for 1 is huge. And like I said, in the Cauldron matchup, flyers were a pain, but just being able to deal with flyers in addition provides even more utility. And Pick Your Poison came up in almost every matchup. Dark Confidant looks a little weird because we are playing 5 drops. However, against the matchups where you want it, which is namely control, it's not that big of a deal because we do gain a lot of life off things like Dredger's Insight, Esper Origins, and Scavenging Ooze. We do have the second Cauldron in the board for the Cauldron matchup. There's a second Carsey Revenant. This is good for shoring up the flyers. The lifelink is also relevant in the aggro matchups. A second Curious Forger in the board. This is probably the card I would change and move maybe for a third Cauldron if I had to do everything over. We want Forgers in the list. As you see, there's one main and one side because they're the only way to get a Roots from the graveyard back into our hand to recast. The problem is against Cauldron and aggro, it's just too slow. You don't have time to, do something like cast it for 3, get the Roots back, play the Roots for 2, and then have an activation for the Roots afterwards. Additionally, if the Forger is in the graveyard and not in the hand initially, now you have to throw an extra step in where you're going Overlord of the Balmerk into Curious Forger, into Roots, into an activation. And there's too many hoops to jump through. One in the main board's probably fine. The second one here, I probably, in hindsight, would have ran another Agatha Soul Cauldron. Scrap Shooter was very, very good this weekend. We're playing a third one on the board. Maelstrom Pulse for tokens or just a catch-all to get rid of something that needs to go right away. Elegia Acolyte, like Dark Confidant, is part of the draw package versus control, but the lifelink's also very relevant versus aggro. We're playing Urgent Necropsy. We could play this against control, but it's mainly here for Cauldron to try to hit a creature, an enchantment, and an artifact and get a good 3-for-1 to get us back into the game. And then Vivian Reed is really, really slow. I don't necessarily like the card. It could be a 4th Duress, but I felt like we wanted even more card advantage against control, and you could run it there. Overall, I went 6-3 in day 1. My only win for day 2 was on a bye, unfortunately. Overall, I was 2-3 against Cauldron. The other matchups, it all kind of worked the way I expected. We were 50-50 versus Cauldron. We beat our Dimir matchup, but there was only one. In hindsight, Mono Red probably was the better metacall because of that. And then we dominated all of our aggro matchups. I did lose to Kona. I did lose to Teamer. I did lose to Control. I lost the tight game 3 to Mono White Control, which I felt was a little more in our favor, but sometimes Magic does magic things. So I can't really complain about the deck. If I had to do the tournament over, I probably would play Roots again. If not Roots, probably Mono Red. And I think this was really, really close to the proper 75. If you've got questions, comments, or anything else, leave them for me. We will be doing a follow-up video where we go through and we do some events so you can see the deck in action yourself. Orlando's done, but, Baltimore's right around the corner. Maybe we'll go do Baltimore. With that said, thanks for tuning into the deck, guys. CCC out. Have a nice day.